A lot has been made of Russia's reliance on old weapons, many of which date back to the Soviet era during its invasion of Ukraine. However, Ukraine is no stranger to using older technology either. Before Russia invaded, much of Ukraine's military equipment also dated from the Soviet era, and it's continued to use that equipment in its defense against Russia. But there's a difference between Russia and Ukraine. Russia uses old equipment to shore up its numbers and project a false image of military might. Ukraine uses old technology to cause damage. And that's exactly what it's just done, as Ukraine's $11 defense has humiliated Russia by taking out one of the country's most advanced cruise missiles. This shouldn't have worked. After all, the weapon Ukraine used dates back to World War I. On September 19, Euromaidan Press published a report claiming that Ukraine had managed to shoot down a Russian Kh-69 cruise missile. That alone, though important from a defensive standpoint, wouldn't be especially impressive. Ukraine has taken out plenty of these missiles before, typically using advanced air defense systems like the US-made Patriot to get the job done. However, it wasn't the Patriot that shot down the Kh-69 on this occasion. Ukraine's weapon was older, much older. Euromaidan Press says that an air defense volunteer operating in Kyiv somehow managed to use what it calls a Maxim machine gun to gun down the Russian cruise missile. That machine gun was a remarkable piece of technology over a century ago. That's right, Ukraine managed to take out one of Russia's most advanced cruise missiles using a machine gun that was available during the time of the Russian Empire and was used by Russian troops during World War I. To explain how, it's necessary to go back to September 7. On that day, Russia launched its single largest air attack of the war so far, sending 810 drones, 4 ballistic missiles and 9 cruise missiles Ukraine's way. Many of those projectiles headed toward Kyiv in what ended up being a fairly effective strike for Russia. CNN reported at the time that at least 2 people had been killed, including an infant, and that air raid sirens sounded for 11 hours. Russia even managed to strike Kyiv's main government building, marking the first time that particular target has been hit since Putin invaded the country. As all of this chaos was unfolding, one air defense volunteer not only kept his head, but decided that an ancient machine gun should be his weapon of choice to defend against the Russian onslaught. What's more, the volunteer decided that he wouldn't target one of Russia's relatively slow-moving drones with his old gun. No, he was gunning for something much bigger and faster. He took out an incoming cruise missile that, if it had struck its target, would have done an immense amount of damage. That volunteer goes by the pseudonym of Hrek. And Hrek spoke to Ukrinform on September 18 to detail what happened and how he was able to pull off such a remarkable feat. Hrek revealed that the Maxim was chosen because it was literally the best weapon Ukraine had against a missile that was taking an odd trajectory toward its target. The missile was flying very low, making it difficult for large air defense systems to detect. Hrek says, "We requested permission to open fire and acted immediately. Bringing down such a target with a Maxim is a 1 in 1,000 chance, but we succeeded." Hrek isn't lying. The Maxim simply shouldn't be capable of taking out a Kh-69. The missile is too fast. The Maxim fires too slowly and would typically have nowhere near the range needed to hit its target. However, it appears that, in attempting to avoid Ukraine's more advanced air defenses, Russia ended up making its Kh-69 vulnerable to a weapon that nobody could have expected Ukraine would employ against the missile. Euromaidan Press and Ukrinform both provide details about the missile's trajectory. They say that Hrek believes the Russian missile was flying at an altitude of about 164 feet. That's more than low enough to make the missile clearly visible from the ground, which is likely what made it such an inviting target. However, even at that low altitude, the Kh-69 was moving quickly. Hrek estimates that it was traveling at about 340 miles per hour. Hrek didn't have long to hit his target. Once he got the OK from his commanders, he says, he unleashed a volley of Maxim fire in the general direction of the incoming missile. Somehow, Hrek hit his target. After the first burst of fire, he says, he saw the missile start to smoke as it veered off course. Not long after, the missile crash-landed just a few hundred meters away from Hrek's position. The downed Kh-69 damaged a few cars after plummeting from the sky, but it failed to detonate and it caused no casualties. Hrek says that a later examination of the Kh-69 revealed that it had been loaded with a cluster warhead. This type of munition is designed to release several other smaller submunitions, each defined as weighing under 44 pounds. Often, a cluster warhead will contain a dispenser, which releases the submunitions above the ground as a missile reaches its target. This approach spreads the smaller munitions over a much larger area than would be hit with a conventional explosive warhead that detonates upon impact with the ground. Essentially, cluster munitions allow the user to hit a larger surface area at the cost of power. Think of them like a flurry of jabs rather than one massive hook or uppercut, and the picture becomes clear. Cluster munitions are the type of munitions a country uses when it wants to destroy smaller targets, such as unarmored buildings, cars, and even people. And if allowed to detonate, these types of munitions can cause major damage. Hrek makes that clear, stating, "Had it hit a densely populated area, the consequences would have been serious. This kind of missile scatters into dozens of submunitions." All of this is spectacular enough on its own. But then, Hrek delivers the coup de grace on the humiliation Russia must feel after losing one of its most advanced missiles to a World War I era machine gun. "We spent 460 hryvnias on ammunition," Hrek says. For context, 460 hryvnias amounts to $11.15, Euromaidan Press says. Russia's Kh-69 missile, by contrast, costs around $500,000 per unit. That means Ukraine managed to pull off the almost impossible with ammunition that, in total, costs 44,843 times less than the missile it took out. Add the fact that Ukraine wouldn't have spent any money on the Maxim machine gun it used for this missile takedown, given that it's a holdover from wars long past, and the result is an incident that cost Russia an enormous amount of money while placing practically no strain on Ukraine's war chest. That, as much as the Kh-69 being shot down, is a massive win for Ukraine. As for Hrek, he didn't have long to bask in his own and his unit's success. There are always more drones to destroy, more missiles to take out. For Hrek, the defense of Kyiv is a job from which there is rarely any rest. "When we take up duty, we stay as long as needed. We don't have the resources to rotate shifts. The longest watch lasted 18 hours. We're here because we can defend and contribute something to victory," Hrek tells Ukrinform. And defend is exactly what he did, in a way that Russia couldn't have anticipated if it were given 100 guesses about the type of weapon Ukraine might use to take out a Kh-69. By now, it's clear just how impressive it is that Hrek used a Maxim machine gun to take out a Russian cruise missile. It's a gambit that shouldn't have worked, with the Ukrainian defender himself saying that he scored a 1 in 1,000 shot. But to truly understand why what Hrek achieved is so remarkable, stack the Kh-69 up against the gun that took it down. Russia's Kh-69 isn't any old cruise missile. In April 2024, the new Voice of Ukraine noted that the missile is among the most advanced in Russia's arsenal, and that it bears more than a few similarities to Western missiles like the Storm Shadow and Taurus. The Kh-69 was developed specifically for use with Russia's supposed 5th generation Su-57 fighter jets, though it's since been used by other aerial platforms, as the Su-57 still isn't being fully deployed in Ukraine. It was a Kh-69 that Ukraine believes was responsible for the complete destruction of the Trypillia thermal power plant, which also indicates that Russia's missile packs a powerful punch behind all of its advanced coating. The missile is also one of the newest in Russia's arsenal, as it was still undergoing flight tests as recently as September 2023, with Russia only deploying it in earnest from 2024. At the time of the Trypillia strike, Ukraine Air Force spokesperson Ilya Yevlas noted that though Russia had used similar missiles in the past, the Kh-69 was new and would take some time to figure out. Of course, the Kh-69 missile is a new missile for us, so we're also studying how we can counter it. Most likely, Patriot air defense system will also be able to counter it, as it has fought against quite more sophisticated types of missiles, such as hypersonic ones, Zircon and Kinzhal. Yevlas said. Yevlas was right. The Patriot is a good choice for taking out Kh-69s, assuming the missile is flying high enough to show up on the Patriot's radar. When that isn't the case, even Yevlas would never have anticipated that a Maxim machine gun would be the answer if the Patriot fails. A quick dive into the Kh-69 specifications show why it would have been such a daunting prospect for Hrek and his Maxim. Army recognition says that the missile is capable of traveling at speeds of up to 1,000 km per hour, which is equivalent to 621 miles per hour. That's not too far short of the speed of sound, though it seems that the Kh-69 Russia lost in its strike on Kyiv was traveling at half of its maximum speed. The missile has a range of between 290 and 400 kilometers, or between 180 and 248 miles, and it can be loaded with penetration and high explosive warheads in addition to the cluster warhead that Hrek says the missile he took down was packing. However, it's the missile's low flight altitude that presents the biggest problem to Ukraine's air defenses. The 50 meters that Hrek reports is actually more than twice the Kh-69's minimum altitude, which Army recognition says bottoms out at 20 meters above ground level. When combined with the missile's stealthy design, this low altitude makes it incredibly difficult for air defense radars to pick it up, as was the case in the Kyiv attack. The Kh-69 is a monster of a missile, one of the most modern and dangerous in Russia's arsenal. The Maxim machine gun, on the other hand, doesn't have any of the qualities you would expect from a weapon capable of taking such a missile down. Once upon a time, the Maxim was one of the world's most advanced weapons. Designed by Hiram Stevens in 1884, it was the first ever fully automatic machine gun, and it has an ingenious design. The Maxim is recoil operated and is cooled using a water jacket that surrounds the barrel, allowing it to rattle off dozens if not hundreds of rounds before it needs to cool off. The gun became a staple of the Russian military even before the Soviet Union was established, making its name during World War I. The Encyclopedia Britannica says that the Maxim played a major role in a global conflict that ended up earning the moniker of the Machine Gun War. It's certainly not a small gun. Vaguely reassembling a piece of towed artillery, the Maxim is transported using a pair of wheels attached directly to the gun. Its barrel measures 28 inches, with the gun as a whole measuring 42 inches. It's capable of firing at an impressive rate of up to 600 rounds per minute, though it's hampered slightly by being fed using a canvas belt that contains 250 rounds. Still, that rate of fire was roughly equivalent to 60 riflemen at the time of the Maxim's invention, which was unheard of. The gun's iron sights are a far cry from the more advanced technology used in heavy machine guns to track targets today, and the original version of the gun had to be crewed by 4 people to make it effective. But effective it was, for decades. Still, like so many weapons of the past, the Maxim should have been consigned to the dustbin of history once better, more advanced variations on the technology that it innovated started to appear. And though that did happen over time, the gun continued to find limited use during the Soviet era, even as better weapons reared their head. Thanks to that, Ukraine has a small stockpile of Maxims that still work, and apparently are capable of shooting Russian cruise missiles out of the sky. As stated before, this shouldn't have been possible. However, it's important to note that Hrek and his unit didn't just randomly come upon a Maxim by chance and decide to give it a try. As much as Ukraine's forces have proven themselves adaptable during their defense against Russia, that sort of decision would have been a step too far. No, the reason why a Maxim was available for Hrek to use on September 7 is much simpler. Ukraine has been using these guns throughout the war. And shockingly enough, some units and Ukrainian soldiers actually prefer using the Maxim over the far more modern heavy machine guns that are available to them. The Economist said as much in May 2022, mere months into Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It noted that Russian propaganda often mocked the appearance of the Maxim on the battlefield, with claims that Ukraine was using these antiques because it lacked modern weapons. That may have been the case before military aid started flooding in from the West, though it's also a mockery that now becomes somewhat ironic now that Russia has been forced to dive deep into its Soviet-era stockpiles to maintain pressure on Ukraine. But unlike the old tanks such as the T-54 and T-55, they're a little more than cannon fodder for Ukraine's drones and a way to shore up tank numbers for Russia. The Maxim is being used for far more reasonable purpose. To many in Ukraine, the machine gun represents a kind of reliability and simplicity that isn't available with more modern weapons. Task and Purpose said as much in a March 2023 article covering Ukraine's use of this old gun, opting for the subheading, "If it's not broke, don't fix it," in the process. In 2020, our friends over at the War Zone noted Ukrainian fighters like the Maxim in part because it's reliable. Task and Purpose wrote, "It's bulky and needs to be water cooled to prevent overheating, yes. But outside of that, it's accurate, the recoil isn't too intense, and it uses the standard 7.62 ammunition still widely available in post-Soviet nations." That trio of accuracy, minimal recoil and abundant ammunition is a potent combination. It also helps that the Maxim is so old that it lacks any of the components that make modern weapons susceptible to Russia's electronic warfare. The Maxim can't be jammed. There are no electronics involved, so that's out of the question. Task and Purpose also notes that the Ukraine war has seen the return of a twisted form of the trench warfare that was a feature of World War I. What better gun to use in a World War I style war than one of the guns that came to define that war? Of course, Ukraine isn't using the Maxim as it would have been used a century ago. A handful of tweaks here and there make the machine gun more effective in a modern setting. Defense Express highlights this in a March 2023 article covering much of the same ground as the Task and Purpose piece. For instance, Ukraine had taken to creating 2- and 4-gun installations of Maxims that could be used to fill the skies with waves of ammunition capable of destroying Russia's drones on the front lines. There are also images floating around of Maxims that have been fitted with optical sights and suppressors, which make them a dangerous weapon to face for Russian infantry that's been forced into one of Putin's human wave attacks against a Ukrainian position. A Maxim in the 2020s is still as capable of tearing through unarmored soldiers assaulting defences as it was during World War I. As the Warzone article that Task and Purpose reference puts it, as long as the gun itself works, there aren't any real hurdles to using it. It has a point. With the ammunition the gun fired over a century ago still being widely available in Ukraine, and the weapon's weaknesses, such as its weight and need for water cooling, being outweighed by its strengths, there is no reason for Ukraine not to use it in the fight against Russia. But will Ukraine now start deploying Maxims to defend against Russia's aerial assaults? It seems unlikely. Hrek's takedown of a Kh-69 is so impressive precisely because it was so unlikely. It was a shot that Hrek could try hundreds more times and not hit the mark. So Ukraine hasn't just discovered the perfect answer to Russia's most modern cruise missile. Ukraine would need more than just Maxims to defend against what's coming from Russia anyway. In September, the Kyiv Independent reported Russia is planning to build almost 2,500 cruise, ballistic and hypersonic missiles in 2025, and Maxim guns aren't the answer for taking those missiles down. But Hrek just proved they're an option. If a missile is flying low and slow enough for a gunner to point, aim and fire at it, then there's a chance that a Maxim could again pull off the same feat as we saw on September 7. Even if that never happens, Ukraine's unique use of this century-old gun demonstrates that, even when using a weapon that most would tell you should have been taken out of commission long ago, Ukraine still finds ways to make it work. Now, if Ukraine's use of Maxim machine guns highlights how it can get the most out of ancient tech, the weapon it's designed to take out the Crimea Bridge shows that Ukraine is still innovating at the other end of the spectrum. Ukraine's deadliest weapon yet is here, and the Crimean Bridge is its main target. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's most unexpected weapons.